Where'd Alan go? It
We
just
scared
left
him
John.
away.
There I am.
There he is. Hey, Alan.
I was just saying UAPedia is sponsoring this whole conference, and it's an interactive site. So go there, contribute, suggest, share your experience, send articles. This is an open source, for everyone. So thank you, Tara. Thank you, Sean, for being here. I think there's one more group here. This final round, which is the implications of the phenomena. But we can start with Sean. How are you, Sean?
Good. Great to be here.
I'm just going to read your bio here because it's very impressive, and I think it's important what you're doing. So, where's your bio? Here I have it. Here it is. Sean Esbjorn has. I always get your name wrong, Sean.
I know it. Everyone does. You're in good company.
It's Hargens. I think it's Swedish, right? Anyway, you got your PhD from humanities focused on philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness from the California Institute of Integral Studies. You've been recognized as a global leader in the application of integrative thinking and research methodologies, both academic and organizational context, but you also are really at the forefront of understanding this phenomena and applying it to people's personal experience, and you've kind of organized a great taxonomy of how to relate to this field, and you're taking it to an academic place people haven't taken it to before. So thanks for being here in this last panel discussion. Any do you have something you've prepared?
Yeah, well, I'm ready. Yeah, I have my talking points ready to dive in.
Go for it. Go for it.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Alan. And welcome everyone to this incredible groundbreaking event that's bringing us this amazing lineup of academic and professional voices exploring the UAP and NHI, non-human intelligences. These phenomena, these realities are increasingly being acknowledged as kind of part of our landscape and what's happening in the world. As Alan said, I'm Sean Esbjorn-Hargens, and I'm the program director of the Integral Noetic Sciences Master's and PhD program at the California Institute for Human Science near San Diego. And this is the only accredited academic graduate program on the planet, on Earth, that allows students to focus on UAP and consciousness studies, right? It's amazing. I'm so excited. I love doing this work. We have 10 courses dedicated to the topic that students can choose from as part of their degree. And Kimberly Engels, who was just part of the last lineup, she teaches a couple courses for us. Jeff Kripal has also done an independent study with a student. And I really see this program as creating the next wave of academics and researchers focused on the UAP and NHI topic. I'm also the principal investigator for what I call super experiencer research, a project that goes by the acronym WISER. And this research is exploring people who have multiple types of anomalous and noetic experiences. And I began this research really to better understand how UAP events and NHI encounters are situated in this landscape of what's often referred to as high strangeness, right? So we look at, 10 total types of anomalous and noetic experiences, including OBEs, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, psychic experiences, paranormal, and so forth. A lot of the kind of material that Jeff Kripal, who was just with us, talks about and presents in his work. So both of these academic positions have really placed me at the center of this conversation around UAP disclosure and kind of where we're headed and what it all means. So I'm excited to kick off this new, lineup for this final segment in today's event, which focuses on the implications of the phenomenon. Which is something I've thought a lot about and discussed regularly with my students, colleagues, and fellow experiencers. So let me jump in. For most of modern history, consciousness has been treated as a side issue, right? Kind of like, let's keep it over there. That's something to be explained after physics, after biology and neuroscience have done their real work, right? So at best, consciousness is seen as epiphenomenal. At worst, it's just a big illusion. But I think the UAP phenomenon is forcing a really profound reconsideration of that whole assumption, right? So what we're encountering today through military sensor data, radar, infrared systems, eyewitness testimonies, whistleblower accounts, and thousands and thousands of direct human encounters is not simply an anomaly confined to aerospace engineering, right? It's an anomaly in our understanding of reality itself, right? Because when UAP encounters are taken seriously, not dismissively, not sensationally, but with rigorous interdisciplinary inquiry, right, we discover something remarkable, that consciousness is not peripheral to the phenomenon, but it's central to it, right? Even foundational. So the data increasingly suggests that we cannot understand UAP or non-human intelligences without also understanding altered states of consciousness, perception, cognition, meaning making, and the common transformative after effects these encounters produce in human lives, right? Because the phenomenon is not just out there, it's also happening in here. And that really changes everything. So I want to dive into a dozen key implications of the UAP phenomenon, not as a belief system, but really as a research frontier, and what it may be revealing about consciousness, human potential, and where we're headed as a global civilization. So the first one is the UAP phenomena forces an interdisciplinary epistemology and methodology, right? Because no single discipline can explain the phenomenon, right? UAP data emerges from physics and aerospace, context, radar, satellite, sensor systems, military intelligence, psychology and trauma studies, religious studies, comparative mysticism, anthropology, folklore, consciousness and psi research, and so forth, right? It's a long list, right? And so it's an integral phenomenon. Reductionism collapses under its complexity, right? So the phenomenon doesn't fit inside a discipline. It cuts across all of them, right? And this goes against much of the current design of the academy, which is hyper-specialized and compartmentalized. The second one is consciousness appears fundamental, not secondary. I mentioned this in my opening remarks. So consciousness is not merely observing the phenomenon from a distance, it's participating in it in profound ways, right? Because encounters often involve altered states of consciousness, time distortion, telepathic communication with other beings, or even the craft itself, download experiences, non-local awareness, non-dual unitive experiences, right? So these cannot be explained by sensory perception alone, right? This suggests consciousness may be fundamental feature of reality, not a byproduct of matter, right? So UAP encounters behave less like external objects and more like relational events between intelligent systems, with us being, on our best days, one of those intelligent systems, right? So it's a very relational reality and phenomenon that and these beings and these craft and ourselves are mutually enacted, right? The phenomena is mutually enacted between us and them. The third implication, mind to mind interaction is reported at scale, right? So telepathy is not fringe. It's one of the most consistent features of UAP and NHI encounters. And it also shows up across all 10 categories in the super experiencer research that I'm doing. So telepathy is just like baseline, right? Just seems to be a core element of consciousness. So communication is frequently reported as direct knowing, mind-to-mind exchanges, emotional or symbolic transfer. It's seen across cultures, ages, and belief systems, and it also mirrors decades of psi research. So the implication here is consciousness is not confined to our individual brains. Information transfer does not require sensory, like physical, the five senses channels, right? So information and contact relationship is going beyond our physical kind of senses and capacities. And so this really legitimizes noetic science in a powerful way. 4, mind to matter effects appear to be quite real, right? The phenomena challenges strict physical causality. We have reports of physical traces, radiation effects, healings, physiological changes, negative and positive health impacts, right? So consciousness, intention, fear, and attention often are modulating these encounters. So there's parallels with laboratory psi findings, And the core implication, I think, here is that mind and matter appear to be far more entangled than our current materialist metaphysics allow. 5, encounters produce profound after effects and capacities in people, right? And this connects directly to the super experiencer research I'm doing. The most understudied data, I would suggest, is not the craft themselves, right? It's human transformation, and because we have reports after encounters with craft or NHI of heightened intuition or psi capacities, healing abilities, synchronicities, expanded empathy, ecological concern, loss of fear of death, radical shifts in our worldview, spiritual emergencies and crises, right? So the phenomena appears to activate latent capacities within the embodied human system, right? And then 6, UAP encounters act as developmental triggers. And this is kind of related to the 5th one I just mentioned, because these encounters really often catalyze long-term developmental changes, right? Our identity, the ontological shock issue, movement from a materialist to a post-materialist paradigm or worldview, restructuring of our meaning making, and this is really powerful. 7, we live in a wild cosmos, right? The universe appears radically more diverse, inhabited, and plural than modern Western cosmologies have really prepared us for, right? So there's a wide range of reported non-human intelligences in terms of morphologies and where they come from and their intentions. There's dozens of distinct encounter typologies across cultures and eras. There's physical, semi-physical, and interdimensional and non-local intelligences that make up this landscape. And there's continuity between UAP and NHI encounters and spirit, demonic, angelic, fairy, ancestral traditions, right? So this really collapses a single species human-centric ontology. So rather than us living in this sparse universe with rare intelligence, the emerging picture really suggests a highly populated, intelligent cosmos, layered, plural, and alive with many forms of mind. And this really pushes us towards what philosophers and anthropologists are calling the ontological pluralism, which I'm going to talk more about briefly, right? So we're not living in one reality with many interpretations, but rather many real kinds of beings co-inhabiting a multidimensional, wild, in the sense that it's very diverse, cosmos. 7, we are starting to see the glimpses of the future human, right? So super experiencers may not be anomalies, but early indicators of where we're headed, right? So history shows that mystics appear before paradigm shifts, visionaries precede new worldviews, psi capacities may represent dormant human potentials, emerging evolutionary expressions, and that evolution may include consciousness itself and not just the biology. And our research of the super experiencers show that people having these experiences are much more common than it's generally realized. With our pilot study of 400 participants, 90% of them reported having 8 or more different categories of experience. All right, number 8, every academic discipline is going to be forced to reevaluate itself. The UAP is not a niche topic. It's really paradigm busting and disrupting. Biology is going to have to consider intelligence without known evolutionary lineages. Anthropology is going to have to consider non-human cultures. Religious studies are going to have to reinterpret angels, gods, spirits, and devas. Psychology is going to have to grapple with non-local mind. Physics is dealing with limits of space-time models that we currently have. Philosophy, we're seeing the collapse of materialism. So the UAP phenomenon is not just adding a chapter to our textbooks, it's literally rewriting the table of contents of all of these different disciplines. 9, the end of materialist metaphysics. Materialism cannot account for the totality of the data that we're looking at. It can't explain telepathy, non-local consciousness, meaning-laden encounters, transformational effects. A post-materialist, integral consciousness inclusive framework is required and emerging, right? So we really need an integral noetic science. 10, the emergence of the future human and the post-human question. And this kind of builds on what I was just saying. So the UAPNHI phenomenon is not only challenging our models of reality, it's really challenging our very definition of what it means to be human. And Jeff Kripal often speaks to this issue, right? So many encounters and super experiencers report expanded perceptual bandwidths, heightened intuitive and telepathic capacities, increased sensitivity to subtle fields of information, so forth. These capacities closely resemble what spiritual traditions have long described as cities or extraordinary human potentials, advanced modes of perception, transpersonal cognition, right? So the phenomenon seems to be accelerating forms of human development that once unfolded slowly across generations or lifetimes, and that seems to be expedited in our current moment. And so, this whole post human dimension that we're entering into, or meta human process, is that, it's not just about technological enhancement, it's about expanded consciousness, hybrid ontologies of intelligence, new relational modes between humans and non human minds, a real reconfiguration of what it means to be human. Um, and so there's a lot of implications for our self-understanding, right? Around anthropology, psychology, philosophy, right? We're not just studying non-human intelligences; we are being reintroduced to ourselves through the mirror of these other beings, right? And so the last point is implications. We have this emergence of ontological pluralism, right? I think one of the deepest implications of the UAP and NHI phenomena is that reality itself may not be singular, but rather plural, right? So the Western modernity is largely operated under this powerful but narrow assumption that there's one nature and many cultures. And in this view, there's one objective physical world out there, and humans simply interpret it differently through beliefs and symbols and cultures and mythologies. And this framework obviously has shaped our science, anthropology, psychology, philosophy, religious studies. But I think the UAPNHI phenomenon places extraordinary pressure on this assumption and basically breaks it open. Because UAP encounters regularly involve contradictory physical properties, apparitions that shift forms, objects that appear both material and immaterial, events that behave differently depending on the observer's consciousness, right? So, you know, we really are looking at we inhabit multiple ontological worlds and realms, right? We're not just having different interpretations of a singular realm, right? There are different natures, different ontologies, different modes of being. So there's not one nature in many cultures, but many natures and many realities, right? So let me just wrap up. I think this points to this integral ontology, right, where an integral approach does not collapse plural realities into relativism, nor does it reduce them into a single material substrate, right? We have to ask ourselves, what kind of realities exist, under what conditions do they appear, through what types of relationships are they enacted, and how do they overlap, interact, or interfere with each other. So with that, I will wrap up, and thank you all for being here today.
Wow, that was excellent, Sean.
Thanks,
You
Alan. You're always so wonderful.
Well, but this is like sort of some of the answers people are looking for, and you've kind
Wow.
of put it together, laid it out in a very accessible way, because of course the materialistic paradigm is disappearing, and that's what the next few speakers will be addressing particularly. But thank
Oh,
you, Sean, when you'll come
yeah.
back for this discussion. And now I'll introduce some of my favorite people, some of my closest colleagues who are here now to present their material. Let me just find their bio, because they like it to be read, their actual bio, because I introduce them all the time, and it's always something I know about them. But doctors JJ and Desiree Hurtak are, let me just find this because I want to get this right, are linguists, they're academics, they are founders of the Academy for Future Science, an international NGO, non-government organization associated with the UN. They're social scientists and futurists. Dr. J.J. Hurtak also specializes in remote sensing, remote viewing, and space law. He's the author of 20 books, including the best-selling worldwide phenomenon, The Keys of Enoch. Desiree and JJ travel the world giving lectures to people around around the planet, just not just on UFOs, UAP, but spirituality, awakening consciousness, higher over self awakening lectures. So they are really interested in the consciousness field. Dr. JJ has 2 PhDs, and Desiree has a PhD. So thank you both
Thank
for
you,
being here.
Alan.
They're also great students and commentators on the UFO phenomena, and they have a chapter in my book,
Yes.
Making
And
Contact.
we'll talk about that too, because that's very cool. And it was really a pleasure to be after Sean because, as you know, we talk about consciousness, and he made that a principal point. And that's really true because we agree with him that consciousness of who we are is not limited to our body. The sad thing is that basically we have been limited to our 5 senses, and all of our work, including with Tara and Alan, is to move us beyond that, and that's part of our studies as well.
Western science has been really centered on the left hemisphere, the analytical, in the absence of the right hemisphere, which is the metaphysical, the musical, poetically speaking, the feminine side recognized by the philosophies of the Far East. So our work is really to understand the synthesis of both left and right hemispheres in the context of the higher consciousness expansion, which is the fundamental. We're no longer looking at traditional science, which thinks of consciousness as a flow of sodium ions from one part of the brain to the other. The consciousness is the foundation of all reality. In our work with leading scientists at Stanford Research Institute and various universities, it's clear that we are multidimensional beings waking up in a vast and awesome universe, having both local as well as non-local potential. And so people who have had these ETI experiences, have had these higher spiritual experiences, are really opening the gates, as the ancient scholars and sages would say, the Sha'ara, the gates of vibration. And our work has been to look at the vibratory acoustics, the vibratory physics, and what I call the musical linguistics of how we must participate in the vibration of raising our consciousness, not just talk about it like in a two-dimensional, three-dimensional sentence. That has been the problem of historic science, is to categorize without experience. And without experience, there is no real authentic new being, new reality, new future human.
And we are multidimensional beings. I just want to go back, and you've mentioned it a couple times during this program, is that James Fox had done this work with the Varginha case and brought one of the doctors forward. But one of the things that Roger Lear, who was the first person to really interview the doctor who was with the being, is he said that this being actually took over his hands and helped him fix parts of the being himself. And then he projected, and again, telepathic is the way it went. And the being said to the doctor of Varginha, overlooking this alien being, right, from who's this strange little guy, he felt sorry for human beings because we can do everything they can do, but we don't do it. And then he said, and this is what the doctor, and this is so shocking, really, for a being who's dying on a table to telepathically say this to the doctor, is that we are totally detached from our spiritual side. This is exactly, you can hear Roger Lear saying that actually on one of the YouTube broadcasts. But what I'm saying is that we have that ability. And one of the uniquenesses of who we are, we believe, and other people have said this, like Nigel Conner, that our capacity is so much greater than what we've been using. So the contacts with various levels of intelligence is actually awakening us to our greater potential. And this is what's so important about everything that we're saying today. So we are not just 3/4 dimensional beings. We, at least in the Blue Brain Project from the Swiss universities, have said that we can function, and also our book on remote viewing, 8th-dimensional space. We believe some of the aliens are not just functioning in the 3rd/4th dimension. This has been encouraged by some of the other speakers as well, but at least in the 5th dimension. But they can come into the 3rd dimension. And we can also, in a consciousness way, go into the 5th and the 8th and even what we would call the 12th dimension. These are our gifts. These are our possibilities. Maybe not always in the physical flesh, but in the consciousness reality.
everything is up for grabs. The whole concept of science is going to take a quantum change in our logic. We've had the opportunity to work behind the scenes for more than 50 years with indigenous elders, with shamans, with social scientists in various parts of the indigenous cultures, and they simply take it granted, a perceptual reality for granted, that we are part of a greater family, a greater cosmic family that's coming back into our time zone to awaken us to the reality that we could take a technological slide towards self-destruction
Or
bootstrap our consciousness and realize we are divine beings in human form and understand our incarnation, why we're here in human form is to help humanity with all of the positive gifts, not the dualistic divisions, not the narrow-mindedness and the repression of the power and potential of what we call in science the right hemisphere, the multidimensional metaphysical side. So this is a great awakening, a great joy to realize we're so close to this quantum change that Gordon Cooper, astronaut Gordon Cooper, we worked with briefly, said was the leap of faith, the understanding that there is a divine potential within each of us to awaken to divine source.
And one thing I think is important in terms of all the speakers today, a lot of times they said they. Well, they is really many. I mean, there's at least 4 general types of ETs. The Nordics, as they're called, the ones that kind of look like us, we're also out in space. I think that's a little shocking for some people, but it's real. Then there's the Greys, which Whitley Strieber is the one that talks a lot about. Then there's also the reptilians and the insectoids. Now, in your book, Alan, Making Contact, we talk about, in addition to the extraterrestrial, we will classify that as extraterrestrial, we feel there's also extra celestials, and some people would have encounters with them that are, here, but not physically flying in spaceships. So you
non-physical energy forms.
Right, and they try to guide and help us. Then we believe that there's ultra-terrestrial levels of intelligence, and Dr. Hurtaks shifting that a little bit to ultra-celestial so people start understanding. So there's many levels of reality. And I think one of the most important parts of reality is the fact that our consciousness field is not local or global, but it's cosmic. And a lot of the other beings that are encountered by people being abducted, are beings in our consciousness field, which means we can tap in, we can be, as Roger Lear was told, equivalent to who they are. Even if they're in technology, 10,000 years in advance of us, where's the consciousness? Our consciousness has a greater ability. In fact, we would go back all the way to the Bible that says that we were first light energies and we had to take on garments of skin. That's why we're so fascinating from that the aliens want to know more about us. And also many of them are like us and they want to help us. They want us to grow. They want us to develop.
So what's the implications? We need an ontology of hope and joy and not of fear, not of what I will call a parochial mindset where we overlook the multidimensionality that is built into the mind as it grows and it goes through consciousness expansion, as being shown by our colleagues at Stanford Research Institute, various universities in Europe. We began to understand even the metaphysical language of the New Testament when John the Divine speaks of the seventh seal, which is the top of the head in both the Sanskrit traditions as well as the Hebrew Aramaic. It's this whole reality of having a vibratory opening of consciousness, a projection of consciousness, and understanding what that really means, the ability to experience other dimensional levels of the universal mind. I think we're very privileged to live at a time now with our space program, as well as our work in paraphysics and parapsychology, is taking into the inner space explorations, is teaming up. The exoteric and the esoteric are coming together, plus the fact that we as specialists in Egyptology have had the ability to go under the ground in Egypt and realize there's historic documents yet to be understood, that Egypt is a matrix, along with scriptures of ancient Israel, as well as the Far East, of great libraries of knowledge, which are essentially points of experience for world humanity to bring together. So that's the big picture, bringing science and spirituality together. That is the great implication of what comes out of expanded consciousness. in the contact story.
So there's much more, Alan, and we're looking forward to the panel of all of us coming together and talking more about who we really are and why this is happening right now, because we are almost at the stage of cosmic graduation.
The
Thank
bottom
you.
line is be hopeful, be joyful for the quantum leap that's coming.
Well, thank you both for your work, for your years of being in the field. Dr. JJ was at the first UFO conference with J. Allen Hynek back in the 70s, I think.
77.
77 Acapulco, Mexico.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So
also
that
John
was
Mack at the first disclosure conference in Washington, D.C., where actually I showed pictures of the 4 extraterrestrial races that are interconnecting with humanity.
all right.
But
Well,
let's-
come back for after Tara's thing. We're going to have a little overview discussion from everyone and all the central points that they've made. Shall I introduce you again, Tara? As a
Go for it. Please do,
I-
Alan. Thank you.
I think so, because she was there in the beginning and here at the end, and she is actually the one who really thought of doing this whole UAPCon.com. So thank you, Tara, for being here. Dr. Tara DiLiberto is PhD as an academic clinical psychologist, a treatment innovator, a mental health AI startup. So she's starting this mental health AI, I guess, program where you can really tune in to take care of mental health in a very functional, practical way. And you're the co-founder there. You're also an author, speaker, past laboratory manager of Harvard University, and former faculty member of Cornell University Medical College. Your research in the field of psychology has been cited in over 2,000 papers. Amazing. And in major media outlets, Dr. Tara is also recognized thought leader in UAP community and topics of ontological shock and mindful discourse. Thank you, Tara, for being here on this particular panel. And I'm really interested in what you have to say. So come on and do your presentation.
Alan, thank you so much for the reintroduction. And it's just such an honor to be here with some of my favorite folks, Dr. Sean and Drs. JJ and Desiree Hurtak. Really were, were these huge figures in the field that I had kind of hoped to one day meet. And now here we are speaking on a panel together, which is really beautiful. And I had planned talk on what I consider to be the 5 potential stages of mindful disclosure. But after hearing what my very esteemed colleagues had to say, I think I'm going to change my plan here a bit. So we talk about ontological shock and how it's really very earth-shattering to realize that UAP are real and that this is a serious topic being discussed in government settings, in Congress, and now also in academia. And along with that, inextricable from the phenomena itself is higher consciousness. So you've heard a lot of people here talk about higher consciousness. Well, what is that? So to me, there are these 2 paradigms of physics. Now, Dr. Brophy, who we'll be hearing from later, is an actual physicist, so maybe he can correct my lay assumptions here. But broadly speaking, there's Newtonian physics, where 1 + 1 = 2, and things are rather linear and time moves in a sequential fashion. And then there's quantum physics, where things don't work exactly how we would expect them to if we're using our 5 senses. But what I've come to realize through intense meditations and through experiences at higher states of consciousness and interactions with people who have abilities like the ones that Sean had mentioned, these expanded capacities to sense things that happen outside of space and time or will happen, for instance, is that we really do need to broaden our understanding of what is possible, or at the very least remain humble and agnostic that these things are possible if you haven't had those kinds of experiences. So when I was on faculty at Cornell University's Medical College, I was very much living in this Newtonian paradigm until that suddenly changed. And very serendipitously, I met Alan and he introduced me to his book, Making Contact. And in that book, I read the chapters that Drs. JJ and Desiree Hurtak had contributed, and their description of what happens at higher states of consciousness very much resonated for me personally, at which point I realized I really need to adapt my understanding of what's possible. So understanding that we have these various, as Tim Spenny, the co-creator of UAPedia, says, there are these different entry points into consciousness. And I'd like to share this slide that he has created that I think you saw earlier in the in one of the promo videos, that has all of these various bubbles with these phenomena around the outside, and expanded awareness is really what is being accessed through these various portals of entry to consciousness. So, for instance, meeting with a medium who is able to talk about your deceased loved one in a way that incontrovertibly indicates that they're accessing information that's not available in the Newtonian world, and psychedelics, meditation, etc. These are all different, again, portals of entry to consciousness. Now, UAP are as well, but it's not necessarily so clear as to why that might be. But I think that once we start understanding, as other people have said, Dr. Daniel Bronco earlier, that ETs actually can communicate telepathically, and that we're having all sorts of people who are very legitimate saying that they've had these experiences. We have the Hurtaks, who wrote a book on the physics of remote viewing, being able to see with one's consciousness. That the mounting evidence suggests that we need to reshape our understanding of reality. And so, narrowing in for this particular conference from all of these various extended spaces of consciousness that we can have experiences at, and to talk just about UAP, I put together a white paper that the Hurtaks had contributed to, that is in the featured articles section of UAPedia. And I'd just like to share once again this my screen, to show you what I've outlined is the 5 potential stages of what I call mindful disclosure. So the first is what I believe is the stage that we're in now, which is that UAP as a phenomena have been verified. There we go. But we've had people like Jeff Nusatelli, who we heard from earlier, go to Congress and say, these are real, we've had experiences, now it's on the record. So with that conversation now having happened, we've entered into stage 1. And stage 1 is characterized on the societal level by cognitive dissonance. There's this feeling in the milieu outside of this particular community where most of us here have had experiences, and we know firsthand that UAP are real. But there's this sense of, people starting to open to the maybe people who totally shut it down are now asking you, hey, what do you think about UFOs? These kinds of conversations are happening. And so at this stage 1, before the other stages unfold, which will cause, I believe, real ontological shock, true ontological shock, it's important to do exactly what we're doing here, which is host these global town halls where we model truth and rigor and calm and curiosity to reduce the anxiety that comes from the uncertainty of not knowing what the phenomena is, and to Dr. Engel's point earlier, to foster a sense of being okay with ontological ambiguity. I really love that. We have to hold various potential truths all together at the same time at this point. So the reason why I had the idea for this conference is because it felt like we're really at the edge of a real awakening in society, and we can kind of get out in front of the ontological shock wave that's coming together. And so as the stages unfold, I kind of see them unfolding in this way. Now, I don't know if this is exactly what's going to happen, but logically, from where we are now in stage 1, these are the potential hypothetical scenarios. So the next event that I see potentially happening is either an unequivocal statement, for instance, from the President of the United States saying we are not alone, or the NHI actually announce themselves. So there's some more kind of globally recognized event where everybody potentially can be tuned into this. Now, I don't know if that will happen or not happen. I don't know if it will happen in a cinematic way or in a boring way or in a half-cooked way. I'm not sure. But if that does happen, that's where we would see a real deep kind of identity crisis across humanity, this existential anxiety. And at that point, I think as a psychologist, anticipating that this might happen, what we can do is focus on fear and reducing our fear together. We can teach grounding techniques. I've been building this AI mental health companion for just anybody who's struggling. But certainly if there is a deep existential crisis for humanity, this tool is at the ready to help people cope. And then after that, I think that's the stage where things can get rather ugly, where we're as a collective potentially giving in to these xenophobic tendencies that we have, right? So what we need to do in what I consider to be stage 3 is thinking about what might happen when we realize, like Hurtaks have said, that NHI are not monolithic, that there are at least 4 species of ETs interacting with humanity. And we know from Eric W. Davis saying in a government setting that these 4 species are real, that this is a possibility. Dr. Hurtak has himself said that just here in this conference that he's seen pictures of these entities. And now when that information that's highly classified goes from a few select individuals to potentially being shown broadly, that xenophobia reaction that we have really might kick in. And so I think at that point, we're going to be challenged as a species to move away from the simplistic black and white thinking, which can activate a deep-seated tribalism and this kind of fear of the other, to really sitting with, for instance, these images and kind of getting ourselves used to them and having these forums to process what it's like to see exactly what they mean and to hold that ontological ambiguity, while at the same time fostering what psychologists call radical acceptance, which is accepting something that seems completely impossible to accept. I think the word radical is applied to like a lot of different areas these days, like radical candor, or there's like radical this, radical that. But radical acceptance truly is radical because it seems impossible to accept that 4 different species of ETs have actually been interacting with humanity since time immemorial and may have, altered some of the ways that we express ourselves as human beings, or that we grow, or that we evolve. I mean, these potential ideas are extremely difficult. So to radically accept them as possibilities, it will require quite a lot of psychological lift and psychological skill to manage that, which I think a lot of people here have been doing alone for many years, or maybe they're doing this for the first time here in this conference and doing it for the first time in community. So these are the types of skills that we need to name, we need to talk about, we need to put them out there as possibilities, because I think if we don't understand that radical acceptance and community and facing these concepts with a courage is not a possibility, then we would just collapse into fear and collapse into this ontological shock, rather than facilitating a collective ontology of hope, which is what we want to do. So from there are these different stages that can unfold, which I see happening like this. And I think stage 4, after we get over the xenophobia, stage 4 is potentially one of the most difficult stages for us to cope with, largely on a whole, which is healing the societal betrayal trauma of realizing that potentially life-saving tech, medical tech, transportation tech has been kept from humanity. Now, I don't know if that's true or not true. It seems to be the case, though, after seeing Age of Disclosure and listening to physicists like Hal Puthoff and Eric W. Davis discuss the tech, it really does seem that there is the tech that has implications for climate and global health, the planet health, our health, et cetera. And if it's true that this tech has been withheld from us, then at that point, I see that there's going to be this huge breach of trust with the American people, with the people of the planet. And at that point, I think what would need to happen is that we would need to be focusing on our reparative action. So we would need, for instance, a transparent ethical plan for the stewardship of this technology to act as a therapeutic reparative exercise or experience that can allow us to rebuild some societal trust. And from there, we have the challenge of integrating all of this information and creating a new human story, understanding that our origins may not be what we think that they are, coming to terms with the fact that experience or stories are real and these things have happened. And at that point, we're going to face the collective challenge of having to re-author our own story as a collective. And so we have our work cut out for us psychologically, but it begins here. It begins with us, and it begins with our community facing these difficult truths and coming to create a new understanding together. And again, an ontology of hope.
Wow. Excellent. Tara, congratulations. That's a great summation. And let's bring everyone on. Yeah. So now that we've kind of set the groundwork, Sean laid out the development, and the Hurtaks kind of gave the higher insight, and Tara gave us the psychological preparation. I would like to start at the baseline about implications of the phenomenon, because right now we're talking to an audience that came here. They're interested in this. They love the topic. And how do we talk about the implications for people who have no idea? Like, Sean, you can't start where you are because they have no orientation to that.
Right.
But we do, and we love it because it's
Right.
so important. But how do we approach the mainstream with this, Sean? I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that's a question we have to keep trying to answer together. I think there's a lot of different ways to approach it. What I often notice, and you're kind of pointing to this with your comments, that there's a big education gap between folks like all of us here and many of the attendees at this event, because we've been engaged with this topic for years, decades, and our worldview has been shattered 4, 5, 10 times in that journey, right? And then for folks who are kind of new to this, just what are the kind of the initial steps? And I think this is why Tara's presentation of those different steps is so helpful, because let's just start with the crafter reel, right? And let's get our minds around that, right? And let's watch Age of Disclosure or whatever else, right? And then once that we kind of warm up to that, all right, let's talk about the beans, right? Let's talk about the 4 different major categories and all the subcategories. And then once we get our mind around that, right? So I think we got to take it in bite sizes and, and kind of figure out, and also I think each person's journey is different, right? Like some people might be more interested in exploring the consciousness aspect. Some people more interested in talking about the tech and the physics, right? So kind of go where you're most drawn to, because any of those entry points are mind blowing if you go down the rabbit hole, And so, let's just hold hands and all jump in the rabbit hole together, and we'll find ourselves in Wonderland.
Well, I think it is a wonderland. It's the most exciting thing happening on the planet. Me and the Hurtaks have been traveling to city to city, and people just love hearing about the possibilities. So, JJ and Desiree, how do we bring this into mainstream?
Well, I have to say it's not just happening because of us. We have to realize the aliens themselves, and again, multiple aliens, are doing something here to awaken us. So I like Tara's explanation. I thought it was fabulous in terms of how the levels are, first with the government, second. The second could be either, like you said, a president or any president, or the aliens themselves. I mean, people often say, why don't they land on the White House lawn? I mean, that would solve everyone's, problems and things like that. Why are they?
Well, they actually have come over the White House in 1952.
But why are they so hidden? Why don't they just make
Well, the
themselves
ancient
known?
Greek philosophers said, why do the gods hide themselves? Well, the experiment of life is we have to find our own divinity. And
Right.
more to the point, with all of our great panel and colleagues today, is to realize we need a university without walls. We need to use the electronic age to reach more people. Social media has to be brought up to a higher
Well, which
level.
is why UAPedia is so important. And so thanks you guys for
And
doing
we've got really, in census, we've got fantastic brain power, and we've got the social stimulus within our heartbeat to go beyond the boundaries and the restrictions of only one side of the brain. Again, I'm saying this out of love to all of our panelists. We have to go from the analytical side of the brain to the experiential side. And unless we raise consciousness within ourselves and have multidimensional awareness of non-locality, we're just talking words, scientific formulas, and this is over the heads of 98% of
Right.
people.
So actually, Alan and I always often say what Stan Freeman had said. The reason they're not here is because they don't want to touch us in a certain sense because we're just a bunch of apes whose favorite pastime is tribal warfare. So that's
Right.
one aspect of it. And the other ones is why should they, in a sense, influence our evolution? And how can they influence our evolution? I'll just leave it there. So
Well, we'll
can
get to that. But I think, Tara, you've come up with some very good points about preparing the public, preparing those people who have no idea. Those are the ones I call the you know, I told you so people, you know. Like, but so how do you suggest without shocking them? I guess a rude awakening is a rude awakening, but what do you?
Well, this is my idea. I mean, I think there are two ways of taking this. So to Dr. Hurtaks' point, in my own experience, until I was at a certain level of consciousness, I was not able to perceive or be aware of UAP. So
Right.
what I've seen is that when there is a UAP, I mean, clearly in the sky, I'm looking at a disc, right? I'm looking at a disc. I'm looking on Reddit. People are saying there's a disc in the sky. I'm looking at it. They're looking at it. I mean, this has happened before. I have video on my phone and pictures of Reddit to kind of prove it. And then what was happening with that very first UFO sighting that I had is that people around me were like, no, that's always there, or that's a drone or whatever. Like they didn't get up off the couch. And so without being at a certain level of awareness, you just don't see it. It could be right there. You just don't see it. And I don't know how many times I must have been around UFOs and not seen them before I had my experience at a higher state of consciousness, right? So I think that there is a certain portion of humanity that potentially came in with their factory settings able to perceive UAP. I don't think I came in with that factory setting. I think that I developed it over time, or came in with it, lost it, and then refound it. But I think for folks who are not there yet, or maybe will never be there, if this line of thinking is correct, if people, for instance, like the U.S. government or the NHI make themselves known, my sense is that the majority of the public will just be like, oh, whatever, it doesn't apply to me. How is it going to help me pay my taxes? You know, it just doesn't matter. And then there's going to be this other portion where they're on the fence, or, you know, maybe they remember seeing something, but they gaslit themselves or they repressed it. And for that portion of the population, especially for people who are repressing these ideas of fear, I think that there's going to be a lot to unpack. So in my first paper on ontological shock, which is entitled Ontological Hope, thanks to Dr. Hurtaks' input on that paper, and I can send a link to that. The website is ontolhope.com, and the password's hope. And so in that paper, it's really a clinician's look at how to use evidence-based techniques to actually address an individual therapy ontological shock. And my sense is that there are a few distinct types of people with distinct types of trauma. So for instance, people who in Eastern Europe who have been through war, genocide, have had another a group take over, that type of trauma, I think, primes a person to be very scared of ETs or another population. Now, that's unlike the indigenous population of America where colonization happened, but there's a very strong, cultural understanding that star people are real and that there are methods to communicate with star people. So I think that different individuals at different levels of consciousness and different groups based on their trauma or their cultural experiences will have different ability to cope. And so I don't know if we can just say globally, like I told you so. I think it's going to be more nuanced.
No, of course not. But no, thank you for that background. So Sean, you look like you have something to say, but I also have something to ask you. So go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think another big piece of like how do we take this mainstream is just by having conversations, right? And this event is generating conversations. We're having conversations here. It's like I often kind of orient towards disclosure as one conversation at a time, right? The more I talk openly about my interests, my experiences, my questions, my process, especially with people who I'm kind of a little hesitant, like, do I say something? Like, like the more I just lean into that and kind of open up and generate conversations, I just feel like that's a big part of how we move this forward. So,
right. But the other thing I want to ask you, because you lay out all these amazing points, like everyone else here, we have to reformat what reality is. That's the real implications of the UAP phenomenon. So how do we go about reformatting the nature of reality, Sean?
Yeah, I wish I knew because
no, but you lay it out. You lay it out a little bit there. So,
well, I think part of it's just like doing kind of what I did, and by really leaning into and considering the implications. Like if we really take seriously what experiencers are telling us, what these accounts involve, like we really look at all the different types of data, sensor data, first person reports, and we really like start asking ourselves, what are the implications? Well, the implications is that consciousness plays a bigger role in all this. Mind and mind can interact, mind and matter can interact. That alone is enough to get us going, right? It's like that consciousness is key, and it can interact with other minds and with matter. Like that's a big shift, right? Like we're still adjusting to that. And I think just really looking at the implications of what people are reporting is enough to keep us up at night.
Right, but it's so big, the implication. I'll get to JJ in a second. That's the question we need to keep asking ourselves, because that restructures everything we know about the body, what Whitley and Jeffrey Kreitman were talking about. And that's so exciting because go ahead.
Here's the other thing is that in my work with experiencers and super experiencers, a lot of it comes down to supporting them to just acknowledge what they are experiencing and just to be open to it, to integrate it, to kind of, embrace it, to orient towards it. Right. And so I think if all of us can just work towards opening up to what we're already experiencing, synchronicities, little mind-to-mind moments like that, and we start kind of claiming our own multidimensionality little bit by little bit, that moves us in the right direction of really seeing how consciousness is key and how we are interacting with other minds and matter on a somewhat regular basis, much more than we tend to realize.
Right. Thank you, Sean. That we are in a consciousness revolution, as the Hurtaks have said and live. So, JJ, you were going to say something there. Dr.
Well, what Dr. Daniel Bronk said earlier on the program, and when he had a near-death experience, and then he also felt the experience of floating in the greater cosmic space with the feeling of serenity. This is a key insight that I've heard from many of the indigenous elders, that we have to let go of our fear of death and recognize we're in a transitional period. Humanity is waking up to its own potential, its resources. We know from the report of Dr. Roger Lear, a colleague, and I also worked behind the scenes in Brazil at the University of Campinas when the specimens were brought in. The doctors could not talk, but they talked with their eyes when I queried them as to the specimens, and people realized that the medical community was shaking in their socks. They could not comprehend that they had live visitation taking place that had a completely different cosmology. So we have to have a sense of humility. This is what is missing in large numbers of the scientific community worldwide. there's not a sense of humility towards the other cultures, the other people who may, in a small way, have volumes of teaching to share, but are shut out. They're marginalized because of their cultural situation.
Yeah.
We have to be ecumenical, humble, and futuristic. That's possible. It is when you let God and let go.
Yeah, so going back to the Vargina case again, the alien said to the doctor, you have these same abilities. It's really up to us to empower ourselves. And I think we're doing it. I mean, even looking at UFOs, and I know that's one of the reasons we do bring it up, is not that it's not real or real. The fact that it awakens us to the fact that we are also cosmic beings.
And they also stress the fact that we're not spiritually awakened enough to understand.
Yeah.
So we're interested in the knives and the forks. So we say in the surgery of the specimen, we're not interested in the soul of the specimen.
And that goes into remote viewing and our abilities to tap into that consciousness field on the same level that the alien intelligence are. We are co-equal with most extraterrestrial intelligence, but we have not developed our inner nature
on the capacity of the soul. But it also goes with, we have to overthrow the materialistic worldview, because it obviously does not work within this expanded paradigm. You just can't fit in, even starting with consciousness. Consciousness is only the hard problem if it comes last, but it's the easy solution if you start from consciousness.
But Alan, we can influence the material world by higher consciousness. That's what we do, right?
Well, that's why we have to transmute.
But you don't throw it out. You influence it. You bring it forth. You bring in the energy.
Can't start there. We have Tara.
You end
we
there.
have to finish Tara. Right? Because you're a materialist, former reform materialist, right?
I am. I'm a recovering materialist. That's right. I 10 years ago, I would have been ontologically shocked that I would be here on this podcast. But I have to say, on the show, but I have to say that it really is, I think it's in some ways an individual journey. And maybe this is me thinking about it as a psychologist. And I'm going to say one thing and immediately contradict myself, if that's okay. If we can hold all of these truths at once. But for me, the transition from materialist to an experiencer of the collective consciousness was one that involved me getting over my own fears. I first needed to overcome a fear of death, a fear of victimhood, a fear of, fill in the blank. I mean, pretty much anything. And then once those fears were overcome and I had the tools and the skills to deal with them, then I was able to perceive that which exists at what we call a higher state of consciousness. But from this vantage point, looking back in time, I think that this is the more natural state, and that I was in a cage of fears prior to that. Now, that's not to say that the only way to these higher states of consciousness is to overcome fear. I think it's a very psychologist way of looking at things, right? You know, when you have a hammer, you treat everything as a nail, but fear and overcoming fear is the common element in so much spiritual writing, religious writing, and everything else. But there are ways that, for instance, to get the grace of the guru, to be around a master such as Amma, who has a huge electromagnetic field around you. It's palpable. You can feel it when you are around her, or even a football field away from her, right? And so I think there are these ways to experience higher states of consciousness. But first, it seems to me that perhaps the most fundamental starting point is to overcome fear and to learn how to do that.
Right. Sean, were you going to jump in? Because
no,
but I want to say, this brings us back to the idea that humans are infinite. We are, when I teach remote viewing, it's like, how do you get the target that's non-local? Because we are non-local. We are infinite beings, and we're, I would say, magical beings, where there's magic in the world. And when we can reawaken the magic, that's really the implications, I think, of this phenomenon. It's like, you mean we're not alone in the universe? You mean there's other life? You mean
Wow.
There's more to reality than what we've been told with a very limited rational mind. So it's like what John Mack says, we need other ways of knowing, not just that will never, he says, we're never going to understand the phenomenon with the rational mind. We need this other intuitive sense. So it wakes us up to who we really are. That's why I think one of the big implications.
This is why we have the picture behind us of outer space, seeing Mother Earth, to give us the overview effect that astronaut Edgar Mitchell championed. The ability to respatialize the way we look at the universe, really up close at a great distance, but also within ourselves, to realize there's a living universe within our body.
And it's going to be fun to go to places like Arcturus or Orion or the Pleiades or even other dimensions. But it's very important also to realize it's not all about getting off the planet. It's also about transforming and making this planet a better place, or making our humanity a better place.
That's the passport to the cosmos.
Right.
The realization we are being prepared ultimately to be cosmic citizens. In the realization, we must put fear, the ontology of fear and restriction behind us, and see this as an ontology of hope, of fellowship, of futurism, positive futurism. That's really the bottom line of all of this conversation we're having. But it requires experience, and we must be open enough and humble enough to have this higher divine spark of experience.
So we need a new ontological map, Sean, like a new. How do we begin? I mean, the stuff you've laid out, the in the experiencers thing, is sort of a beginning map, but this applies to everyone. Which should be taught in kindergarten. Like, you're not just your body. So how would you lay out a map to this larger reality?
I mean, that's a big focus of a lot of my work, and I tend to just draw on a lot of different sources to try and kind of get all the pieces on the table. Currently I'm teaching a course on the cities and the superpowers that Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, talk about. And so by looking at those traditions and how they understand these expanded human capacities and these different abilities, of telepathy and levitation and, out of body experiences and contact with non-human intelligences, as Jeffrey Kripal said earlier today, like it's all of this is in the religious traditions, right? And so by going back into them and getting reacquainted with how they understand the transformational process, like how do we activate these capacities? How do we integrate them? How do we develop them? How do we expand them? And how do we do that in an ethical way and in a grounded psychological way, an emotional way, right? So that's one example, is by this kind of comparative method of looking at traditions and the indigenous communities and their cosmologies. When we look at the different types of beings, when you look at the experiencer reports on beings, which is one of my favorite areas, there are at least 8 major categories of types of beings, with ETs just being one of those, right? We have celestials, we have, different types of what I call metahumans, like non-physical human beings, or they're physical humans in other dimensions, right? Like there's so many fascinating categories of beings out there. And like by just looking at what's being reported and compiling it and comparing it and kind of pulling out the patterns, we start to see, oh my gosh, this is such a bigger cosmos than we realize. It's so much more dynamic and diverse and participatory, and it's just like fascinating. So I think a lot of it's just like kind of this comparative, integrative, multidisciplinary, multi-mode of knowing, like just put it all on the table, right? Let's just like start kind of exploring and remaining open. So it's like kind of ontological generosity, like you're open to many different possibilities, and it's epistemic humility, like you are very humble as a knowing being. So it's like that combination of epistemic humbleness with ontological generosity. It's like just be a kid in a candy store, just like, wow, this is like a crazy, amazing, multidimensional reality that I'm finding myself in, right? And there's so many different types of beings, there's so many different types of realms, there's so many different types of practices and traditions that can help us become this more expanded mode of embodied consciousness, right? It's just like we are wired to be that. We are so, it just like we trip over ourselves and it happens, right? Like it's just so fascinating that it's been so regulated and dismantled and set aside when it's our inherent nature.
Right. I love your enthusiasm because it reminds me we are the breakaway civilization.
Right.
We could be stuck in this old mold where you can't do anything, you're limited, or you could realize, no, you're not limited. You can be telepathic. You can move objects at a distance. You can change the weather, which Desiree did in Sedona. You know, we can do these things but there's this, it's like a straitjacket we're in, or we have to break. I mean, that's the fight. That's so. I mean, yeah, we're making it happen by talking about it. And of course, Dr. Hurtak had this really transformative experience. You know about that, Sean? I mean, Tom.
No.
He was shown some of those dimensions that we're talking about. We'll talk to Sean more.
Yeah.
Great.
And actually, yeah, and as we transition, I would just like to say, so Doctors Hurtak, as I mentioned earlier, have written about remote viewing and practice remote viewing. And one of the major things that really struck me as by the way, I sat with AI for about 20 hours to understand all of the Hurtak's work, and just in summary, I mean, it's so expansive. Dr. J.J. Hurtak has not just 2 PhDs, but 11 honorary PhDs. I mean, we're covering a lot of ground.
Well, I think that's what AI said, at least.
That's what AI said, yeah.
2 real ones and a few honoraries, yeah.
A few honorary. So one of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the predictions, or something that you saw, Dr. Hurtak, was that there was a hexagonal shape on Saturn in 1973, which wildly was later confirmed by our next guest space probe. So Dr. Brophy, while he was at NASA, built the Cassini space probe, which in 2004 confirmed that there was a hexagonal shape on Saturn. So we can sit here and kind of laugh about these cities, but when we have, you know, a documented case of there being a hexagonal shape on Saturn predicted decades before a space probe that our friend built, you know, I mean, it starts to get very verifiable in the 3D. So this is
that's
where
the same as Ingo Swann seeing rings around Jupiter,
and that's what we mean by the esoteric and the exoteric coming together. The inner micro universe and the macro universe coming together, and we are the thinking membrane in balance and harmonics, if we wish to deal with these greater realities.
Well, let's take that point.
Back, yeah, we have to.
Then go go the wrong direction. Civilization goes backwards.
We'll come back to you, JJ. But to kind of wrap up, let's take these really wide discussions that we've had here today. But what does the future look like as we embrace this phenomenon, as we embrace this expanded part of who we are as human beings? What does the world look like, Sean, from that perspective?
Very open, very dynamic, overwhelming, exciting, like pretty much every adjective you could imagine. I think it's going to be a wild ride, you know, like put your seatbelt on, keep your heart open, keep your mind open. And, you know, like, let's jump in together into the deep end, because it's going to be amazing and terrifying and so incredibly, wonderfully important.
Well, we are in the deep end. I mean, this conversation only can happen if you can swim to the deep end, you know.
Well,
Sean, how can people find you and your work and everything you're doing and exploring? It's so amazing.
Yeah, 3 main places: the superexperiencer.org website to see the research and learn about that and participate, the cihs.edu website to learn about the PhD and master's program, and then I also teach public courses at metaintegralacademy.com. So those are the 3 best places to find me. So thanks.
You know,
and I'm
I
a
think
student
you're
of
going to
Sean,
go
so I can verify that the class is amazing. Yeah.
And I think, Sean, I feel like a whole other level coming to you now because of your work and exploration. Because it's no longer just putting out concepts; it's the reality that we're living into. That, like the telepathy tapes and telekinesis, all the things that are happening. That you know, everyone has the cities, so why not? Why not start at kindergarten with this? So I think you'll start teaching elementary school. So anyway, thanks, Sean, for all your work.
Great to be here with you all.
Thank you. So Tara, how does the future look like to you once everything comes online? We get over the ontological shock. We have the awakening. We're all cosmic citizens. What does that look like?
I mean, I think it looks pretty good. I think just the period of ontological shock, it's a lot. It's not so unlike coming out of an addiction or, for instance, an eating disorder, which is what my background is in, developing eating disorder intervention. So there's an ego trap of fear that keeps people separate from their higher states of consciousness, and that recovery process is ugly. Getting over addiction is ugly. And it is necessary. So I don't think that it's something we should shy away from. I don't think we should infantilize ourselves. To Jeff Nusatelli's point earlier, we're ready. We need to know the truth, and it doesn't matter if it's difficult or disturbing. We deserve to know the truth,
Right.
and the only way to come into contact with our higher states of consciousness is to face it head on. So I think that it's looking pretty good just after a period of turmoil, but we're here supporting each other through that. And it's okay. It's okay.
It's amazing how many levels humans are at. The ones that don't, like, just sitting on the couch. Oh yeah, you have a UFO out the window. Big deal, right, Tara? It happened to Tara. And the ones that are engaged in a new conversation that's trying to, where else do you want to be but here in the conversation? So Doctors Hurtak, JJ, and Desiree, how do you see all this unfolding and coming into a greater future?
Well, I think it's important to realize the future is bright, and that all the ancient teachings, as well as what we're seeing today, says we are not alone. And although there's many levels of contact, many different forms of intelligence, and we have a whole cosmology behind that, but basically we have been given the information to wake up at this time. We really do feel we're coming into that time of graduation. We feel that there's 8 billion people, I should say, on the planet right now, because they know something is taking place, and we can all be part of the change if we see our higher nature and start connecting with who we really are.
Right.
This is the time where we're beginning to understand the words of the Christ figure in the New Testament, who said the Father's house is a house of many mansions. We're beginning to create a new consciousness cosmology that will allow us to graduate and to continue the Adam and Eve story into these other mansion worlds. This is a fantastic time. There will be tragedies, there will be environmental upheavals, culture shock, etc., but we will stay the course because we take the higher path. So to all of you, let the divine spark within your heart allow you to understand the brilliance of creation, the brilliance of the infinite way that we're part of.
And know that there are forces up from on high that are watching, helping, and always there to guide us.
And the big thing I want to end with is what the ET said to the doctor in the hospital. We don't know who we are. And that's the exciting part. This is why I think the phenomena, whatever that is helping us tap deeper into our full human potential with telepathy and remote viewing, all the things. Telepathy is the language of the universe. And when we develop those skills, those cities, in a sense, we start to expand into our infinite nature. And when that comes online, when everyone's born knowing they're infinite, we can go beyond religion, go beyond dogma, and start to live in these new realities. I'll say that. So thank you all.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
It's so exciting, isn't it? I don't know. It's just like something like I can't get enough of talking about this and being part of this. So
and thank you, UAPedia, too.
Thank you, UAPedia. Go to uapedia.ai. Tara, you're going to stick around, right? And we're going to... I'm
going to stick around. That's right.
And we're going to talk to Dr. Brophy. Sean will be in touch. JJ, Desiree. I'm always in touch with them. So thank you. And thanks, everyone, for watching. We're not finished yet, though. Yes,
we're not finished. And also, Doctors Hurtak are going to be presenting live at tcche.org in San Diego next week. So I'll be there. Doctors Hurtak will be there. Alan?
No, but I will be with the Hurtaks at the Conscious Life Expo in LA, February 20th to 22nd. Come CLE at the LAX Hilton. We're going to be talking about remote viewing and the divine nature of the soul and everything. And there's going to be fantastic people at that conference. So I really support that as a way of engaging this conversation on a whole other level.
And you can see where we are at keysofenoch.org. Thank you, Alan.
Right.
Thank you, Tara. And thank Tim.
Right. Okay. And Tara, how do people find you?
Oh gosh, I don't know if you can. Right now, you can check out my work in the consciousness space at inherentlyvaluable.com. That's pretty much all I have right now. I'm really headlong in the tech space, but if you want to see my work in consciousness, inherentlyvaluable.com.
All right, great. But the show's not ending. We have one more very special guest. So Tara, you're going to introduce Tom Brophy, or should I?
Yes, I will. I'm going to introduce Dr. Brophy, and then after Dr. Brophy presents, we're going to have a fireside chat, and we'll close out the event. Thank you so much, Drs. Hurtak and Dr. Sean. We'll see you all soon, and very excited to